So what is the 108 Tai Chi form, and like what do you find about it to be particularly appealing to you, or what have you been getting out of it?
Yeah. The one of the things that I have personally felt since, well, I'm forever as far as I can remember, is that meditation is more than just sitting, but that it is the sitting part is a training to help carry one through into daily life. So the kind of focused meditation that results in from a quiet seated practice is also at the heart of doing something like the 108 style. Um, Learning to move with that concentration rather than being out of that concentration. It's like having a meditative object. Okay? So like in the Visuddhimagga, the Buddhaghosa's work, there's these 40 kasinas, the 40 objects of meditation. Those help to focus the mind. For me, I think that the sequence of moves is a way of holding that same kind of concentration, but in a physical activity, as well as then, 7:30 a.m. each morning in the meditation hall. So that's one of the things that has been behind my interest in learning the whole style. There are shorter styles that one can do if one is just interested in balance or um, you know physical training of one kind or another. But I've been looking for the 108 style because it is does demand that level of concentration and focus to be able to do it and to keep track of what one is doing and to be in touch with what is happening in one's body. Uh, One of the things that I have found that I needed to learn all over again was because of retiring and moving and all these things that have happened the last 5 years. Um, I haven't had much chance to practice, but this how one's hips are aligned with the movement is absolutely essential. That if one is not oriented to where you need to be, then the balance is off. Um, and it becomes a strain rather than feeling solid. So extending the sense of awareness into the body through motion is something that, for all of our work at IBS and in classes and talking about concepts and so on and so forth, that wasn't an opportunity. And now I'm really glad to have a chance to do it for myself.
Wow. Well, I'm really glad that you get a regular and consistent chances to exercise in that way, and it is a fascinating thing because yeah, like when it comes to scholarship or when it comes to learning in general and discussing and debating and investigating and analyzing, it's so heady, it's all up here. But
Mhm.
then what you're talking about, and I never really thought about it in this way before, but with Tai Chi as a meditation and the movement itself being a meditative object, I think it's a really fascinating entry point, just or another way of looking at it for me. And what you're talking about with the hips too, because hips are so powerful and in what they allow movement wise. But like I used to play lacrosse in my high school dimes or whatever it is, and when you're guarding someone or even basketball or whatever it is, you don't look at the ball, you don't look at where their head is, you look at where their hips are because that's kind of where they're going to be going if you're playing defense. And then there's this other element too, where in certain meditation trainings, you focus, on a light or some sort of glowing object just a couple degrees down from your belly button or something like that, right? And it's all down there, right? Like there's a lot of power in that, centered in that area, and has it. It's just interesting that there's so much focus in that zone. Have you kind of really investigated why it is like that spot in particular, why that kind of helps you, bring you out of your head and bring you into a more powerful center in that region?
It's not particularly something I've thought about, but as we discuss it here, it seems to me that it's really almost a gravitational center of the body. It's like a physical location that is at the center of the body. Um, and, to be upright and to move requires being located, having awareness there. And it's our fellow human beings, many of them just walk around without paying a whole lot of attention to what they're doing. And if you're going to be present in the present moment as you're doing whatever it is you're doing, it really helps to be comfortable, to be located, and to be centered in that place and have that kind of physical gravitational location. Um, and I remember somebody trying to convince me based upon their college class back, when I was an undergraduate. They were taking a class in anatomy and tried to convince me that walking was a matter of controlled falling forward, that you're just falling forward and keeping up with this process of falling. And it just struck me then, and it strikes me now, as pretty wrong-headed. I mean, that's not a way to walk. That's falling. And and yet this was what was being taught in anatomy class about human walking, which really kind of surprised me.
Yeah, I took a Tai Chi class in college and I loved it. It was a really it had a lot of impact on me, even though it was like a half credit sort of thing. And but when I was doing it, it's all about maintaining balance. And as you would step your foot out to the right or left or however you were going, if someone were to try to push you, the idea was that you'd be able to more or less like keep up. And if you're someone that every time you move your foot in any direction is falling, then it's like you're it's not it really isn't so much walking so much as you're trying to catch yourself every opportunity you give yourself to fall. Yeah, it does it kind of encourages me to, in my everyday walking life, to maintain a sense of balance and everything, and not to put terminology that shouldn't be where it is, but I'm just kind of curious in exploring it in this way. Does it feel like when you do Tai Chi that there's a ritualized element to it? Does it feel like you are doing ritual, or does it feel like something else? Is ritual not an applicable word for it?
Yeah. I think that it's ritualized. And I actually have ranted against the category of ritual, that there is no such thing as ritual in the abstract. It's just a category that we use. What there is ritualized activity. And any kind of activity can be ritualized. And certainly the Tai Chi, it's kind of like on a continuum between seated meditation, walking meditation, doing Tai Chi, doing other kinds of activities in the world, and then just how you're present in the world as you go about your regular life. Um, and the whole tendency that we have of being distracted is simply not being present. Whereas, there's a great ambivalence about the understanding of ritual. Certainly, ritual for many people means not paying attention. That it's just doing something by rote, you're going over it, you're not actually paying much attention. It's just you're doing it, whatever it is. Um, and yet that is very limited, that pejorative sense of ritual as a way of not paying attention is, I think, mistaken, because people who perform ritual, who actually do it as a religious practice, are paying very close attention. You know, it's not that they're, you know, thinking about something else while they're doing this. Um, they are, in fact, doing something very specific, following a set of practices that they have been taught or that they've learned through a manual of some kind, and it's very intentional. It's not a way of being distracted. So I think that, yeah, ritual is quite appropriate
Hmm.
to describing Tai Chi as a category of things because it's a very ritualized activity done in the same fashion, but it's done in a sense also for its own sake. It's not it's not instrumental. I mean, probably if you wanted to get strong or better balanced, there are more efficient ways of doing it. Um, but the doing of it has those benefits in addition. And I think that the same thing is very much true of meditation. You know, if your goal is um, to lower your blood pressure, biofeedback would be probably a much more efficient way of doing that than sitting in Zen meditation for half an hour in the morning. Um, so it's the practice itself that is important, not these kinds of instrumental benefits that many times become the focus of attention when people talk about these things. Um, and it's also um, satisfying in its own way. I mean, it's it's a long-term and in fact creative project to engage in meditation or Tai Chi or different kinds of art or performance or writing or research. All of these are ongoing processes. I mean, so much of the focus is on what's the outcome, what's the product, got to get it done, get it out the door, blah, blah, blah. Um, which is really a diminishment, a way of taking away from our human experience. It is that alienation. I mean, a little nod towards Marx that, yeah, that kind of labor was alienating, right? Because it didn't involve the whole person. And, to be honest, I feel very happy that I have the privilege of being at a stage in my life where I can look at the process of what I'm doing rather than having to push to get the product out. Um, so in some ways, this is I wish that it were easier um, for people to undertake doing something like, I'm thinking about writing a report for a board of trustees or for a church body or, getting something accomplished that you need to have these things done and all of this compiled and out, Um, so many people seem to not find satisfaction in their lives and in the work that they do. And it's, boy, do I feel really immensely privileged in being able to talk this way. And certainly remembering back, there was years and years punching a time clock and pushing a broom, um, where I certainly did not feel creatively involved in the labor at that point. Um, this is a really complex issue, you know. How do people find satisfaction in their lives when they are economically constrained to following somebody else's mandates about things? Um, I don't know. How about you?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I definitely want to continue exploring this in the sense where, especially with your work with Buddhism and capitalism and all the things that you've uncovered with that and analyzed with that. And just briefly, I mean, I think that from a labor standpoint, I absolutely hear you. And then even just from a more basic human experience level, I remember hearing about uh, Suzuki Roshi, who, and this is a story, I don't know if it's true or not, but somebody was going through, maybe cleaning out the garbage pail of wherever they were all living, and he found a core of an apple that he had eaten, and it was uh, very precisely cored, like the whole apple was consumed. And maybe I'm paraphrasing the story, maybe I have it misremembered, but basically the idea was that every bite that he took of the apple was with great intention.
Mhm.
And in my everyday life, I fly through apples. I don't. I need to get the apple done so I can go do the thing, and so I can take my kid to school or whatever it is. And boom, boom, bang, bang, and then like, oh man, where'd the day go? Where'd this happen? Like, how did this all? And then, oh my gosh, we're already halfway through, more than halfway through June of 2024. Like this year just started. Like all of these kinds of feelings of time flying by, and yet there are people that are in a position that uh, or allow themselves to be in a position where they can enjoy the apple like fully, completely. And maybe there's a different level of nourishment that they get from the apple, even with each bite or whatever it is. Um, and and yeah, it's a sticky situation too, where uh, I mean, and then this is something I definitely will like to explore your expertise on, but it does seem like a lot of people do a lot of work that is for work's sake, and there's no connection to it, and there's no pride in it beyond living on the tech campus, or they have ping pong on the office floor. That's fun, right? While you spend extra hours at the place, and so yeah, like, have you seen uh, this this trend of a disconnect from just enjoyment of life, quality of life, connection to life happen in a heightened way in these 2024 times, or is this something that has been kind of simmering for a while with industrial revolution, modernity and things like that?
Well, I don't know that it is particularly linked to any um, specific economic situation. And realistically, we're all pretty much speculating about other people's lives in the past when we talk about these things. Um, were people happier and more creative before the invention of the mechanical clock that, you know, set time? I don't know. Uh, it would be easy to imagine that people were freer to engage with, making shoes or, slippers or what dresses or whatever it was that they were doing. Um, and yet, I know enough about what it was like for families to live on farms where your time was absolutely controlled by what was happening on the farm. You know, you have to be there at particular times of the year. You have to do certain things that, particularly, you know, making hay while the sun shines is a real issue. You had to get the hay cut and baled and in the barn before it rained. Um, and if you didn't do that, you might not survive. Um, so in a lot of ways, this I think reflects, what comes to mind is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That, thinking about my situation, yeah, I've got most of the lower levels of needs taken care of, and now I have the freedom to engage in the upper strata of that hierarchy. And people who don't have those, who are not in that situation, don't have that freedom. Um, so I'm very hesitant to get too preachy about the way people should live their lives. Um, and that's what I'm feeling really awkward about right now in talking about this stuff, is that, yeah, I'm in an upper middle class, relatively secure situation, had a little brush with some kind of reality with the fire nearby. What do we need to have packed? You know, um, passports and, change of clothes and extra shoes, and, that kind of thinking was very immediate and consuming and wasn't about, oh, what's the creative process involved in packing a go bag? Um, so I think that much of this is something that has bothered me a lot about kind of white upper middle class Buddhism, um, is that it speaks from a position of entitlement, um, about how people should live their lives based upon a kind of lack of recognition that not everybody has, not everybody can go off to Spirit Rock for a week-long retreat. Um, so yeah, I'm thinking that there needs to be a real balance in how we talk about what Buddhism can do for people, um, when we talk about things like justice and, because there's what I've seen at times is almost a tendency to, um, either blame the victim or talk almost like magically about Buddhism. It's like, well, if you just aren't attached, then everything will be good. So, like, oh, that person's suffering because they're attached. Um, that doesn't address the suffering of people in Gaza. It doesn't address the suffering of people in Sudan. It doesn't address the suffering of people in Ukraine. It's unrealistically, um, detached from the actualities of human life to say, well, if they just weren't so attached to blah blah blah, they would not be suffering. Um, there's almost a level of condescension involved in that kind of response. Um, And it reminds me of something that I have written about, which was going to a suicide survivors annual celebration. Um, this is in the Palo Alto area, and I wound up filling in for a local Buddhist minister. And I prepped with my usual story about Kisagotami and the Buddha telling her to go find a mustard seed from a house that where death has never visited, where no one has ever died. And I showed up at this holiday season event. And first of all, I was just really blown away by the number of people who were there. There must have been like 300 people, all of whom were survivors of other people committing suicide, family members. And the the focus for much of the ceremony was on those who were there for the first year. And then there was talk by different ministers, and then it was my turn. And, I gave the standard Buddhist spiel about, realizing that death comes for everyone and so on and so forth. And wound up feeling like I had just entirely missed what was going on, that it did not reach or address these people's concerns, their lived experience. And in part, of course, that was because they weren't already primed with Buddhist ideas, right? Um, but I felt like it was a hollow message to tell them, oh, don't worry, you'll get over it. Everybody dies. Um, that's not what they needed at that time. That was not, skillful teaching. Um, that was me falling back on what was familiar, what was, comfortable for me, rather than acknowledging their suffering. Um, so it's very easy to, for me, and I think for some other people, to be comfortable with our life and our idea of how things work, and then to think that that should be the way it is for everyone. And it just really isn't. Um, hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that that story, and I absolutely hear what you're saying. Where you prep and you do the thing that you've done before, and then you kind of show up, you deliver it, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, like there's almost like a disconnect from the get because it just wasn't where. But then you have all this training or you have all this familiarity, and like that ought to have fit the program. Um, Yeah, I do really do appreciate how you are allowing for a lot more space in the conversation to understand how kind of white Buddhist convert Buddhism might be projecting or does project, and the limitations that an individual can have in their way of understanding how other people live their lives, because everyone is their own person, um how does that, like, so if you were to give, not necessarily at that same event, but if you were to give uh some sort of talk about not necessarily what people should do, right? Because that's what we're talking about. It's like the should is not the operative word here, but like how you can encourage somebody to have a more open understanding of the Buddhisms, or even just have the lives that could be possible, How could you help encourage somebody to have a more openness in that regard? Within, like, a Buddhist context, if possible. Like, is there
Hmm.
a place you'd pull, like, is there a sutra, or is there a story that you feel could open up somebody else?
Well, it just so happens. Um, Here in the meditation hall, about a month ago, a Kannon statue, Guanyin statue of Avalokiteshvara, um, kind of appeared without much public announcement. It was just installed. And this is about 5 feet tall, maybe 6 feet tall. It's one of the 11-headed, 42-armed versions of Kannon. And it instigated apparently a fair amount of curiosity on the part of members of the community. This is a very diverse community, although it's connected to San Francisco Zen Center. Not everybody here is not everybody here is Buddhist, not everybody here is Zen tradition. There's a pretty large insight community, um, Tibetan adherents, some other random Buddhists around the fringes, um, Quakers, self-realization fellowship, uh, and some other stuff that people do who, I mean, even smaller groups, um, if they're a group at all. Anyway, um, so there's a lot of variety, is what I'm saying. And there was no explanation, no introduction, no ceremony saying, oh, we're going to have a new statue. In part because it is just a meditation hall. It's not a temple. So it's not that the Kannon statue is an object of worship. It's just been installed there um, as part of the setting, one might say. Um, and of course, Zen meditation practices are not worship oriented. There's not a whole lot of focus on. There's no incense in the morning. There's no offerings and so on. So I was asked to do a presentation for the community about the statue. Um, Questions apparently have been asked about the 42 arms and all the different implements that are held and what the meaning of that is. And, typical intellectual fashion, they want to know what's this mean and what does that mean and what's this doing and where, that kind of thing. But it gave me an opportunity in this presentation to do some research into the figure of Avalokiteshvara and discern that indeed it is pan-Buddhist. There are versions of Avalokiteshvara in Southeast Asia, in Burma and Thailand, as well as in more classically Mahayana cultures. And so what I tried to emphasize was that this is a unifying figure, that this is relevant, that Avalokiteshvara is relevant for people of the Theravada lineage background, people in Tibetan background, people with Zen backgrounds, that it's not just the value of compassion, but the actual figure of Avalokiteshvara as such unifies all the way across the entirety of the Buddhist tradition. So the sense that, oh, well, we're different kinds of Buddhists was what I was attempting to subvert and say we can all relate to each other through the object of this statue, through the symbol of this way of in symbolizing compassion that is a value we all hold. You know, compassion is a nice, big, fancy word, but what does it mean? You know, what is it other than an abstract value that we say we hold? Well, here is Avalokiteshvara with the 42 arms, each of which holds a different kind of implement, each of which has a value and a symbolism that communicates to all of us. So there is, for example, a bell, one of the Vajra type bells, and as one of the implements. And very classically, bells in Buddhism are explained, or the explanation, the interpretation is that it's not just, it's not just marking 3 rings and, okay, so we're going to start meditation now. It's pay attention to the sound and watch how it disappears. That the sound of the bell is itself a teaching of inconstancy, of impermanence. That this is something that runs across the entirety of the Buddhist tradition. In the same way, mirror is one of the objects that is held by Avalokiteshvara. And the mirror, of course, is frequently found in Buddhist sutras and texts and teachings. But again, it is a way of understanding inconstancy, that what you see reflected is reflected because it's reflected right now. It's not permanent. The reflection is the result of causes and conditions. And when those change, the reflection will change. So all of these enable us as different versions of Buddhists to connect to one another around shared ideas, shared concepts, shared values. And I do think that it's really very worthwhile to explore the questions of how do we, as different kinds of Buddhists, connect to one another. There's a lot of emphasis, like at the JTU, on interfaith dialogue. So we as Buddhists are going to talk to Christians, and we as Christians are going to talk to Muslims, and Muslims are going to talk to Jews, and we're going to have good interfaith dialogue and so on. And it seems to me that we would benefit a great deal by having intra-Buddhist dialogues, to where we do explore not what makes us distinct from one another. I mean, because that kind of that's either boring or distressing. And it's like, oh, well, we have a special teaching. We've got what Buddhism really is, or we've got what the master really said, or something like that. There's either this kind of exclusiveness, which is, like I say, it's either a boring project and activity that I don't understand why people engage in, or it becomes a way of creating conflict because of a sense of superiority. One of the things that I experienced many years ago at a conference on Buddhism and Psychology was a presentation by someone who had been trained in a very specific version of Buddhism. And what I found consistently was that they were making claims, two different contradictory kinds of claims. They were either claiming that something that was unique to their tradition was actually pan-Buddhist, or they were claiming that something that was actually pan-Buddhist was unique to their tradition. So it's like the lack of familiarity with the breadth of the Buddhist tradition created this notion that somehow theirs was unique and special and just true of all of Buddhism. I mean, these are, like I say, these are contradictory claims that were being made. And yet both of them were wrong. um, and that's, you know, it's one of the things that bothers me about claims of being special or having the unique teaching, or is written about in terms of, you know, secular Buddhism, claiming that they've got the true teaching of the Buddha, right? That they know that this selected version of the Pali Canon is what the Buddha said. You know, and even in popular writings, one sees the claim that the Buddha spoke Pali, right? Which is kind of a natural extension for people to make if they don't know, right? Like, this is the authoritative language, this is what the Buddha spoke, therefore the Buddha spoke Pali, right? Because they don't know that it was a made-up language for recording the teachings, and that the teachings were recorded several centuries after the Buddha. And that, you know, anyway, so claims of authority, claims of superiority, like I say, they're either boring or distressing, depending upon what people are doing with them.
Yeah. I mean, that is all. I mean, what a fascinating story to have Kanon miraculously kind of show up, or just, you know, spontaneously show up, it seems like, and to have
Exactly. There is a history of its transmission and how it wound up there, but
oh
it
yeah.
appeared without any ceremony, without any explanation. It's like came in one morning and here was a statue.
Wow, wow. I really, that was a really wonderful wonderful story that explained that led to like a very very fascinating, very helpful I guess broadening of what I understood, and what I think that a lot of people could benefit from hearing, which is that there's this notion that, I mean, one, I just want to go back to the canon for a second, and like the way that you were describing how the different hands had different symbols in it, the bell and the mirror. Some people would say, and before we spoke, I think I would be under the assumption that, well, the bell means one thing and then the mirror means another thing. Yet you were pointing out the reflections in each, that uh, the the like the lacking of permanence is reflected in each um, vehicle there. And I really did. I really appreciated how you were talking about the the approach of interfaith dialogue, or the approach of, you know, getting everyone in a room together to appreciate each other's paths, or appreciate each other's traditions, by first recognizing a unifying component or something like that. And uh, I'd be curious, like, so how, like, I know this is something that we're talking about now, but is this something that you've given thought to, in the sense of how you could even foster it within a, you know, sitting down in a physical way, where you can say, well, here we are in a room full of a multi-tradition, a multi-faith tradition population. What this event is trying to do is to show that we want to start from where we're the same and then kind of appreciate our differences. Have you thought about how you might approach that beyond how we're talking about it in a more a broad way?
No.
No, okay. I'd just be curious
Uh,
how it'd be actualized. Like, I think it would be a really fascinating thing because you're right. Like, there's so much like, well, we as Christians think this, we as Muslims think this, and it does allow for a lot of well, we do this because it's the right way, or we do this because obviously, if you knew what we knew, then we would be doing it like this. Um, but I think that there's something to that conversation. It's just like how does that conversation start? It just sounds like a fascinating uh, thing to undertake.
I'm personally actually more interested in just tolerance. Just we don't. Okay, so this may sound totally contradictory to what I was just saying a little while ago, but I don't think that all religions are ultimately the same. I think that that is a very artificial way to go about understanding traditions. I think it imposes a lot of presumptions. And I think that it's a really bad place to start. If I may, another anecdote.
Please.
Uh, there was an event in Berkeley shortly after I finished my PhD where they were wanting, I don't even know exactly who organized this. It was a long time ago. But they wanted to have representatives of different traditions, right? So it was like really, um, although they didn't think of it this way, it was an extended exercise in tokenism. And they already had a Buddhist, but they wanted to have somebody to represent the Shinto tradition. I don't know why. Um, so I said, yeah, I know something about Shinto. I think I can talk about it. And so I wound up on this panel, and the discussion initiated with a presumption that all religions were oriented towards some kind of transcendent moral development. There's an individual project of moral development moving towards some kind of higher state. You notice the gesture, yeah? This is, so we're moving up and on. Um, and I said, well, what I know about Shintoism, the tradition, is there's maybe some of that, but most adherents, it's like, they want a good night's sleep. So there's a deity for insomnia. Or they want to protect their car. So they go get the car blessed and put a little amulet in it. Or they want their kid to get into the right school. So they'll go and have a ceremony performed for that. And there isn't, for most people who are involved in Shinto in one way or another, the kind of idea of a path of progress. Not that that's entirely absent, but my understanding is that where it exists, it reflects the kind of Neo-Confucian um, addition to Japanese culture that came in pretty late. Um, and so I talked about that. And then there was a lunch break, and then we came back for small group discussions. And I was really confused by this exchange because in the small group discussions, a woman said, boy, I really related to everybody who talked about their different traditions, except for that guy who talked about Shinto. That didn't make any sense at all. Wait a minute, that was. So there was a presumption that there's a single overarching model of what religion is. and that it's just different versions of that. So Buddhists meditate to achieve a higher state, or Christians pray to achieve connection with God, or this idea that there's a single kind of mystical core to all religions um, is, I think, not only misleading as an academic presumption, but also a distortion and a disservice to the integrity of traditions as they actually exist. So I actually probably would not want to be engaged in the kind of project you just described. I would not want to be the one to be trying to lead such a discussion. I think that for communities who are in contact with one another, there's reason to talk about what our shared values are, so that there can be a working sense of living together. And that's what I was addressing here. In the abstract, as a means of overcoming conflicts or something like that, I'm not convinced that it will work, that it actually contributes much. I'm embarrassed to say that I haven't finished reading the chapter. But the reason that I'm interested in a recent book by John Holt on the conflict in Sri Lanka is that the opening of his final chapter, it's a collection of essays by different authors, and he has this concluding chapter. He says, I've changed my mind. Like most academic liberal scholars, I thought that religion was the solution. And that the reason that there were conflicts was because of economics, social history, so on and so forth. But that in his years of experience in Sri Lanka, he came to the conclusion that, in fact, not religion in the abstract, but conflicting religious identities contributed to conflict, right? That this sense, as I said before, that's, a sense of superiority as distressing becomes a reason to impose one's views on others and to devalue them. I mean, look at what's happening with Christian nationalism here in the United States today. I mean, Louisiana just passed a law that said that the 10 Commandments had to be posted in every classroom. People who are convinced that their version of Christianity is the truth and that they need to impose it on other people are not religious in doing that. I mean, it's all too easy to say, well, that's not really Christianity, or Hamas and its terrorism is not really Islam, because what we really know is true about religions is that they're peaceful and cooperative. Well, no, the history of religion is a history written in blood. It's not been a panacea for the world's ills the way it's sometimes talked about. I think I've gone off on some kind of digression.
No, this is great.
Give me another question so I can focus my thoughts again.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, and that's kind of where I was interested. I know this is all new information, like what's going on with Louisiana, and I do appreciate your sensitivity to talking about or to distinguishing between unifying all religions in some sort of vacuum that is impossible at best, and then there's this no difference between that and just general tolerance. And I do appreciate you distinguishing between more broadly patching things up amongst other people and also just addressing things as little smaller communities and making sure everyone in the community understands where everyone's at. So thank you for that. And but as we do kind of get into this like current events element with what's going on with Louisiana and the rise of necessarily the rise of Christian nationalism, but this the degree to which it is impacting um, everyday life, civics, and policy and things like that. I was curious what with what we were talking about earlier about how it's becoming difficult for you with recognizing where you're where you're at or where you are as an individual and how it's difficult for you to say what other people should be doing and how they should be living their lives and what religion should mean for them and how they should go about enacting it if that's even available to them. But when we are in this situation where there is a religious governmental body that is impacting so many people that are not participants necessarily. Um, what is what is a response or a reaction that if you could offer some guidance on even for yourself, like what would you what is a way that you would want to respond to something like this, if you're comfortable offering that?
One of the themes that I keep coming back to is that, and this is an analysis on my part, and it's in large part a kind of interpretation of what is happening. There's a Human beings tend frequently to be kind of tribalistic. And the idea of a nation is basically a tribe. When we separate the kind of ethnic sense of a nation from the political sense of a state, and that's why the nation state combine is important to kind of disaggregate, to take apart, to analyze. And so much of the modern movements towards nation states have been to reify a particular identity as language, as ethnicity, as region. And when one has that kind of singular identity, where being white and Christian and an American are all conflated together as a singularity, as a single thing, that's very different from what I consider a Buddhist sense of personal identity, which is multivariate, right? And fluid. And I think that the sense of being a citizen as opposed to a tribal member, right? To a member of this ethnic identity, right? To being a citizen of a state, I think that that's the really revolutionary contribution that the American Revolution and the French Revolution made. It's like we're not subjects. I mean, this is still true of the British. They are subjects of the crown. They are not citizens of the state. So we ought to be able to interact as citizens with different values and different conceptions of the world and to work out how to live together in this society. Because by not being so rigidly identified with a particular singular sense of identity, but rather with a more fluid, I'm both a citizen and a Buddhist, you know, both a husband and a father. I mean, these are not contradictory. And yet the way in which white Christian nationalism runs those together and then tops that off with male superiority and an authoritarian mindset and a combative sense of um, um, autonomy is very destructive, I think, because it doesn't give room for other people to be different. And even the resistance to the idea that I mean, a plurality of a diverse society is not a value, it's a reality, right? I mean, decades ago, I was struck by this, there was a movement for English only. Um, and yet at the same time, the very primitive ATM machine at my bank had Spanish as an option. Right? The bank didn't care about English only. The bank wanted customers to be able to do their business. So they recognized in action the diversity of society. It's the reality. And if we don't acknowledge that, you know, it's not something that is being imposed. It needs to be something that's recognized. And that, again, for me, from my understanding of Buddhism, is the nature of Buddhism. That it's not saying, here is something that you should believe. Here are a set of doctrines by which you should live your life. Here's a set of ethical, moral standards that you need to live up to. It's saying, oh, gosh, if you notice, if you're quiet long enough, you'll notice that everything changes, that there isn't anything that is permanent, eternal, absolute, and unchanging. Maybe this is something important to live with. Not that it's a teaching, not that it's a doctrine that one has to adopt and believe and hold to. Oh, yes, I believe in impermanence. It doesn't matter if you believe in impermanence or not, you're still going to die, right? Your car is still going to need upkeep and maintenance. The food in the back of the fridge is still going to get moldy, right? Impermanence is not a doctrine, it's not a belief. It's the way things actually work. And, I know that to people outside of the Buddhist mindset, that sounds like I'm just saying, well, it's absolutely true. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is if you can get out of your preconceptions and get quiet long enough to watch and to see, it's like people sometimes describe meditation, people who don't do it a lot, sometimes describe meditation as not having any thoughts. I don't, in my experience, maybe this is evidence of how bad a meditator I am, but in my experience, it's not that the mind stops producing thoughts. It's that you realize that they're going by. Right? the mind is producing all these thoughts based upon, what you did yesterday and what you've got planned for later today, and how your knee hurts because you're sitting in this awkward position. Maybe you can shift now a little bit because nobody will notice, and you'll be okay. And oh, there's the leaf blower again, and so on and so forth. The mind is producing these thoughts, but they come and go. Um, and that's what the idea of impermanence, of inconstancy, reflects, is just that. Um, you know, there's a lot of obfuscation and mystification of the idea of emptiness. People act like it's some kind of big deal, and it's really important, and it's profound, and it's, so on and so forth. And I think that the reason it seems difficult, other than the fact that some people get to be able to publish books about it and have weekend teachings and claim to be authorities and hold up their tradition as having the true interpretation of emptiness, and all that boring and distressing stuff, it's so obvious. It's right here, right now, right in front of our face is impermanence. We may not want to recognize it. We may not want to see it. We may look away and be distracted. We may distract ourselves. But that's what's happening. It's so obvious, it's easy to ignore. Yeah. Oh, so what if the milk went bad? Yeah, I'll just dump it out and go get another half gallon, right? But I mean, if you want a profound teaching, milk has gone sour. There's a profound teaching. The
And
milk
so,
has gone sour.
yeah, makes for interesting cereal too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and and I'm curious too if there's some sort of like on a national level subconscious uh tightness and tension around how much change is happening in our country and in the world at large with the advent of AI, climate anxiety, all sorts of things. I mean I don't consider myself someone that knows enough to really speak very intelligently about this at all, but there's this rigidity that you're talking about where there's like, well, here we are, the white Christian nationalists that have a male authority and have like an imposition and have these are the rules and this is how our group works, and there's no flexibility, there's no fluidity like a citizenship allows, and yet here we are barreling along in our impermanence and noticing great change, like profound change on a level that I can't even quite comprehend, with our technology, with our climate, with our uh, access, with our fuel resources dwindling or changing and emerging in different ways. Um, and there are tensions that I mean, I even me who tries to be okay with a lot of change and okay with and making it part of my practice to be okay with change, is having a hard time with. I mean, there's a lot happening. So I'd be curious if you'd feel comfortable suggesting or if this rings true in any way, if because it's all speculation. I don't pretend to know everything on this, but like if there's this tightness that comes from a reaction against allowing for change to happen or allowing any kind of impermanence to be entertained in their minds.
Um, from what I have seen in my life, it seems to me that there are fluxes and flows. And part of this is aggravated by the media. Not that the media is a bad guy, not that it's a singular thing, but the media will exaggerate. You um, in the 50s there was a lot of resistance to change because people had gone through World War II, you know, and they just really wanted stability. Um, and um, the Leave It to Beaver kind of family um, was idealized, and yet that was no more generally true than the opposite way of viewing American life that was created not too shortly thereafter by television programs that promoted the idea that, all those people in San Francisco, all those hippies are really crazy and, so on and so forth. And that was no more true. I mean, I think that there are cultural ebbs and flows with what it is that is in the popular awareness. Um, which is not to say that it's always going to, that these, oh, well, it's going to get better. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that there are these shifts, and um, it's like both are true. There are people who are actively adapting to change, and there are people who are resisting it. Why? We could come up with a lot of reasons, cultural background, social status, economic status, education, so on and so forth. We could come up with lots of reasons why people react in different ways to change. I mean, change is what's happening. Um, and I think that there is a lot of talk about that it's more than it used to be. Well, it certainly feels that way from the way it felt 50 years ago, but 50 years ago, um, I wasn't paying as good attention. Um, you know, Vietnam was very disruptive. Yeah. People's lives were upended. There was a huge amount of change in society at that time. Um, so is the Civil War that America got involved in Vietnam, the anti-colonialist war that we barged into, is that it not as um, significant globally as what's going on in Israel and Gaza now or in Ukraine? I mean, it's like we've kind of normalized Ukraine, into the third year of this conflict, and it's not always on the front page anymore. Um, so some of this I think has to do with awareness and what's being emphasized and what's being promoted, and um, it's not it's a truism of journalism that if it bleeds, it leads. Um, but the reason that that's a truism for journalism is that that's what gets people's attention. That's what we as um, animals are grabbed by. So our perceptions of what's going on are distorted by both what is being talked about generally and by our own tendencies to focus on um, what creates fear, what creates anxiety. And indeed, there are forces that are working, it seems to me, purposefully to create fear and anxiety in order to get people to abdicate to an authority of some kind. Um, you know, all the all the talk about immigrants as if they were a polluting infestation, you know. So much of this language, it it amazes me that people are not more familiar, and I think that this is perhaps a shortcoming of the educational system, are not more familiar with the dynamics that led to the Nazis. You know. And if you're familiar with that, with the way in which the German population was manipulated by the messaging, um, it seems all too obvious what's being done. Um, I think I'm rambling again.
No, no, this is it's really helpful for contextualizing what's going on because I recognize that uh, that that occurrence. I see what you're saying, and I do feel like what we are being told as a mass, uh, what's bleeding is what's leading, and how much of what's bleeding that we're being shown, and what type and who's bleeding that we're being shown, and who's that those that are not being shown, and because there are plenty of conflicts going on all over the world that aren't getting the same amount of attention as the ones that the U.S. happens to be involved in.
Mhm.
And it's been going on for some time, and the tensions are high kind of all over the place. Are they more high than they've ever been elsewhere in the history of the world? I don't know. It seems like the world is kind of the spot for that for kind of conflict at large, and always. um but I do appreciate your your encouragement to at the very least recognize that there are ebbs and flows, and that there are times for us to at the very least just be there for this for what it is, and and to know that there are powers that be that influence how we recognize reality, and then there are also conditions that we have as individuals that we bring to our interpretations. um, I just hope that we all find a way to collect ourselves before it really gets out of hand, which it already is, but more so. And I think that we're winding down now, and I had one more question to ask, and this is just kind of a quick, if it's something that you have in mind, but is there anything that you'd like to promote? I don't know if there's a new work that you're working on, or if there's a foundation or a cause, or something that you'd want to have more people to know about, as something that you're interested in, or just want people to be involved with anyway.
Um, well, gosh, there's the uh, coming from the Department of Self-Promotion.
Please.
There, there's the Oxford Encyclopedia of Buddhism, which is coming out in print version this fall. Um, it's an online project, which I think makes it unique in terms of being a reference work. Um, Oxford has been a leading force in online resources, and the encyclopedias are actually placed as research encyclopedias. So the standard model for an encyclopedia that we all kind of grew up with in high school, I guess probably kids don't go to the library and look up the, encyclopedia articles anymore. But that model was an encyclopedia served as a summary of knowledge up to that point. A research encyclopedia is oriented towards what are the current form topics of research and where is the field going. And this is really made valuable viable because it's an online project. I remember how exciting it was when we got the Encyclopedia of Religion. Merge Eliad's big project. It was, 13, 12, 13, 14 volumes, whatever. It was a big, huge project. And that came out around the time that I was a graduate student at the GTO. And then 10, 15 years went by, and then, a revision, right? And then a new set of books, big project. And this incredibly cumbersome way of communicating information. We didn't have it, but friends of ours, when I was a kid, they had an Encyclopedia Britannica. And I remember, as a 12-year-old being fascinated by this. Here was all the knowledge in the world. And here was the yearbook, for 1956. And here's the yearbook for 1957. And here's the yearbook for 1958. So these were changes, to strike a chord with our previous discussion. This is attempting to capture the new stuff, right, in that year. So there are other encyclopedic projects on Buddhism, but the feeling I have about them is that they are based on this older model, that they're trying to summarize everything about the study of Buddhism that we know up to now. The Oxford project is oriented towards what's happening now and where is it going. And in fact, trying to push contributors, and this has been a problem, trying to push contributors out of their comfort zones. Right? Scholars can tend to be very, very fixated, very close. This is what I know, and this is what I'm going to write about. And so trying to get them to say, okay, but wait a minute, this is related to that. And so if you're going to write about Avalokiteshvara, how's about writing about Avalokiteshvara in India, Tibet, China, Japan, and Southeast Asia, and not just about Avalokiteshvara in Tang Dynasty, China? And people have said, no, that's not my expertise. I know about Avalokiteshvara and Tang Dynasty, China. That's what I'm comfortable with. And yet, it seems really interesting to me that maybe there are connections. And so many of the contributions, much of the body of the work is attempts to get people to talk about their research in a way that projects forward for the field. And because it's an online project, right, we're coming out with the print volumes, that's going to be great. It's going to be available, but it's also an ongoing, it won't stop there. Already we've been adding additional entries. And I remember when we started this project, I was talking with editor at Oxford, and they came back with this notion there's A level and B level and C level entries. Right? It's a very classic encyclopedia model. There's most general A level ones, and then there's more specific B level ones, and then there's really specific C level ones. And the general ones, the A levels, those are big. And the more specific B level ones, they're not so big. And the real specific C level ones, those are short. And this was the model that we were expected to fit into because that's the way encyclopedia is supposed to work. Now, we're looking back a long ways here. And that model has not worked. And instead, what we have is something that is much more, oh, wait a minute, this topic is really interesting and has these other ramifications. So it's going to go to 12,000 words. This is a more specific topic, and it's not like A level, B level, C level. It's like, what's important about this? How does it work? What is it that people need to know in order to understand where future research should go? Now, that's an ideal that has inspired me to undertake this project. And I hope that it has partly fulfilled that goal. Um, but because it's online, it's going to be able to continue to expand to reflect the profile of Buddhist studies as a whole, to reflect new methods, new areas of research, different approaches, different topics. And to be able to be revised much more easily. Right? You don't have to wait 15 years to get a new edition that's up to date, which then immediately begins to go out of date. Right? But these can be continue to be updated and revised and expanded on. So it's pretty much indefinitely open as a project, and will continue to be for the future.
Wow. What an amazing project. I really appreciate a couple of elements of this. One, I think it's awesome that you get to excite and connect with a 12-year-old version of yourself who used to get excited about seeing encyclopedias, and here you are about to publish in print and then continuously publish online um, parts of this work. And then two, that I love this idea that it's a publication that is looking around instead of just behind, and just kind of saying like, this is where we're at, and
Mhm.
then all things considered, this is where we could see ourselves. And
Mhm.
then to have that out, and almost like a yearbook, almost like a print in time, like this is what we thought, and then having the ability and the access to have people have eyes on new research, having people have eyes on new analysis, providing feedback for better, for better, but with different levels of critique, I guess. And it just feels for like a much, it probably allows for a really healthy amount of study. And yeah, what an excited. Well, I'm very excited. So when does the print one come out? Is that does that have a date for it to be out for purchase?
Um, the online version is available now and
Right,
has
right.
been for quite some time, and the print version should be out this fall. So,
Wow. Okay, we'll be on the lookout for that. Well, Richard, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I really do appreciate it, and I uh, I I feel very inspired by everything we talked about, and I definitely want to brush up on some Tai Chi as a result of everything as well. So I really do appreciate it. Thank you
that's
very
it.
much.
Okay.
All
Thank
right,
you.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.